For nearly 50 years, the entire world lived under a single question, not whether there would be a war, but whether there would be anything left after it. Two superpowers stared at each other across oceans and borders, each holding enough nuclear weapons to end human civilization not once, but many times over. This was not a war fought on a single battlefield. It was fought everywhere, in space, in the minds of populations, in the economies of nations, and in the shadows where spies moved silently. This was the Cold War, and its consequences are still shaping your world today. In 1945, the greatest conflict in human history finally ended. World War II destroyed entire continents. Cities lay in ruins. Millions were dead. But victory did not bring peace. It brought division. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two most powerful nations on Earth. They had been allies out of necessity, not trust. And once the common enemy was gone, their differences became impossible to ignore. America believed in capitalism, individual freedom, and democratic government. The Soviet Union believed in state-controlled economies, one-party rule, and the spread of communism. Two completely different visions for how humanity should live. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, the three great leaders, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, sat together and redrew the map of Europe. What they really did was draw the battle lines for the next 50 years. Then came the moment that defined everything. In March 1946, Winston Churchill stood at a small college in Missouri and delivered a warning that shocked the world. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that curtain, the Soviet Union was building something terrifying. Country after country in Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, lost their independence. Communist governments were installed. Borders were sealed. Secret police eliminated opposition. People who had just survived the Nazis now found themselves living under a new kind of tyranny. And the economic consequences were immediate. While Western Europe rebuilt with American money through the Marshall Plan, Eastern Europe fell behind. Factory output stagnated. Consumer goods disappeared. Food lines became a permanent feature of daily life. The Soviet system promised equality. What it delivered was equal poverty. But the Iron Curtain was only the beginning. The real horror was building in silence. In 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb. The United States no longer had a monopoly on the most destructive weapon ever created, and so began the most dangerous competition in human history, the arms race. Both sides built thousands of nuclear warheads, then tens of thousands. By the 1980s, there were over 70,000 nuclear weapons on Earth, enough to destroy every major city on the planet several times over. The strategy was called mutually assured destruction, a name that told you everything. Neither side could attack without guaranteeing its own annihilation. The world was kept safe, not by peace, but by the threat of total extinction. And the economic cost was staggering. The Soviet Union was spending up to 25% of its entire GDP on the military. That is a number no economy can sustain forever. The Cold War was called cold because America and the Soviet Union never fought each other directly, but millions still died because the superpowers fought through others. In 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviets, invaded South Korea. America intervened. China entered the war. 3 years of brutal fighting ended in a stalemate. The border barely moved. Over 5 million people were dead. Then came Vietnam. America poured hundreds of thousands of soldiers and billions of dollars into stopping communism in Southeast Asia. It became the most controversial war in American history. over 58,000 American soldiers died. Vietnamese casualties exceeded 2 million, and America lost. Then the Soviets made their own fatal mistake. In 1979, they invaded Afghanistan. 10 years of guerrilla warfare destroyed the Soviet military's reputation and drained the Soviet economy. The Cold War was never cold for the people who lived in the countries where it was fought. The Cold War was not only fought with weapons, it was fought with ideas, with propaganda, and with technology. And nothing captured that competition like the space race. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite in human history. America was terrified. If the Soviets could put a satellite in orbit, they could put a nuclear missile anywhere on Earth. 4 years later, Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to travel into space. The Soviet Union was winning the future, but America responded with the most ambitious scientific project ever attempted. In 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. The United States had reclaimed its position as the world's technological leader. But behind the spectacle, the space race had a deeper economic purpose. It proved which system could innovate faster, which economy could mobilize resources more effectively, which society could produce the engineers and scientists of tomorrow. The answer to that question would decide the Cold War, and that answer was becoming clear by the 1980s. The Soviet economy was dying. Decades of central planning had produced a system that could build nuclear missiles but could not produce enough shoes or bread for its own people. Stores were empty. Factory output was declining. The black market became the real economy. When Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985, he knew the system was broken. He introduced two reforms, glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. But reforming a broken system is like trying to repair a building while it collapses on you. Glasnost allowed people to speak freely for the first time, and what they said was that the system had failed. Perestroika tried to introduce market elements, but only created chaos. The Soviet economy didn't improve. It accelerated its collapse. Then came the night that changed everything. November 9th, 1989. For 28 years, the Berlin Wall had divided a city and a continent. It was the physical symbol of everything the Cold War represented. A world split in two. But that night, thousands of East Germans gathered at the crossing points. The guards, receiving no clear orders, opened the gates. People poured through. Strangers embraced. People climbed on top of the wall with hammers and chisels, tearing it apart with their own hands. Within a year, East Germany and West Germany were reunited. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union itself would cease to exist. One by one, the communist governments of Eastern Europe fell, not through war, but through the simple force of people who had had enough. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, where the dictator Ceausescu was executed on live television. The Iron Curtain that Churchill had described 40 years earlier was torn down in a matter of months. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev appeared on television and resigned as president of the Soviet Union. The Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The Russian tricolor took its place. 15 independent nations emerged from the wreckage. The largest empire in history dissolved not with a war, but with a television broadcast. The Cold War was over. America had won, not because it was stronger militarily, but because its economy worked. Capitalism outproduced communism. Free markets out-innovated central planning. The Soviet Union spent itself to death trying to keep up. 25% of GDP on the military. Billions on weapons while store shelves stayed empty. No system can survive that contradiction forever. But the Cold War never truly ended. It evolved. NATO expanded eastward. Russia, humiliated by economic collapse and loss of superpower status, rebuilt under Vladimir Putin with a determination to reclaim what was lost. The conflict in Ukraine is, in many ways, a Cold War that never finished. And now, a new competition is emerging, this time between the United States and China. Trade wars, technology restrictions, military buildup in the Pacific. The same patterns are repeating, because the lesson of the Cold War is not that one side won and the other lost. The lesson is that when two superpowers divide the world between them, the entire planet pays the price, in military spending that drains economies, in proxy wars that destroy nations, and in the constant fear that one miscalculation could end everything. The Cold War lasted 50 years. It cost trillions of dollars. It killed millions of people. And it ended not on a battlefield, but in an economy that could no longer sustain the weight of its own military. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. Empires do not always fall to armies. Sometimes they fall to numbers.